In this video we want to talk about the negotiation process. Now, negotiation occurs when there are conflicting views amongst individuals or groups. When there's a difference of opinion regarding some issue. It could be over pay or working conditions. The management perhaps see the working conditions as ideal, whereas the workers may see the working conditions as not right. There is something wrong. It could be hazardous, or it could be too onerous. The tasks may be too difficult, or they may be asking too much of the workforce. So when there is a difference of opinion, negotiations comes into play. It's a process where individuals and groups interact to reach common ground. So there must be a desire on both parties to meet and to try to resolve whatever issue was separating them. Without negotiation, conflicts in the workplace will escalate, causing resentment and dissatisfaction between employees and employers. So it's important that both sides come together quickly to resolve any issues before the issues escalate and become even bigger, and perhaps a lot of bad will is generated on both sides and positions become more entrenched, which will make it difficult to find a solution later on. So it's important that when an issue arises, negotiations is started in a speedy sort of way. It must be initiated promptly to try and deal with the issue, to find a solution and move forward. But it's important that it doesn't escalate. Negotiation involves a process and a set of stages. The type of approach and techniques will be determined depending on the conflict or the disagreement. So clearly the magnitude of the problem, whatever the issue is, will determine the type of processes that will be undertaken. It may be, for example, it will involve union officials or perhaps outside experts in conjunction with company experts and senior management. Or it may be that it's resolved quite amicably at a very local level, a very minor level. It could be a small issue. The point is that whatever the issue, it should be resolved quickly. According to Leet in 2007, the negotiation process follows a four-stage model, and this is really what we're going to talk about in the rest of this video. He suggested it starts with preparation, and then presentation, and then proposing and exploring, and finally trading and agreeing. So there are four stages in the negotiation process according to Leet. Let's talk about preparation. Well, preparation is key in the negotiation process, and this includes collecting and analysing data. It's important that both sides in the negotiation be adequately briefed about the problem and about the conditions within which, or if you like, the environment within which the problem arose. So it's important to have collected and analysed appropriate data. And then the negotiators should set objectives. What do they want to achieve? And then identify the strategy and the tactics they're going to pursue. What type of arguments are they going to make? What points are they going to raise? What's the sequence of the points? How important are the points? And what will they accept and reject? So they should try to work these out in advance before the negotiations actually take place. The teams that are involved and who is going to do what within the team, the negotiation team, that should be agreed in advance. And ideally there should be some dry run of the negotiations to see what flaws in the arguments can be exposed and dealt with, and to ensure that there is fluency and confidence on each side of the negotiations, so that they feel confident going into the negotiations that they're going to get a good settlement from their perspective. So as I said, there are 4 parts, and the first one is preparation, and within preparation we can identify different stages as well. Now let's start by collecting the first point, which was collecting and analysing data. Well, before the negotiation process begins, research and data collection is an important stage. It's important that each side to the negotiations, as I said earlier, are properly briefed. They should know exactly what the situation is, what's causing the problem, and they should also have something in mind as to what they will accept as an outcome. The parties involved in negotiations must have an understanding of the nature of the disagreement. They must understand exactly what caused the problem. Because if they don't understand that, then an agreement can't be reached. They must understand exactly what triggered this particular dispute, and to go right to the core of that and try to get it resolved. Research must be collected and analysed regarding the subject of concern. The research should not be generalised. It should really focus in on what is it that's causing the problem. And it should come up with possible solutions and also identify which solution is acceptable for that party. But also, as we'll see later, it should have perhaps a fallback position. If they can't get what they want, have they got something else in mind that they will accept instead of? All negotiators must have the right information prior to the negotiation meeting. So the negotiators must be properly briefed. They can't go into the negotiations not properly briefed, and thereby, of course, they will lose the case. But not only that, they will feel pretty bad by not being able to articulate precisely what the issues are and what they were prepared to accept, and not capable of putting forward a coherent and logical case. So they must be properly briefed, and they must have the right information to enable them to do the job. So that's the first part on collecting and analysing data within the preparation stage. All negotiators have the right information prior to the negotiation meeting. That's, of course, important. Also, it's not just having information. They could have information which is perhaps not specific to the problem. It could be more information about the specific problem that's causing the issue. Why are they there? They're there to negotiate over some issue. So what is the issue? Why are they there? So, for example, negotiations regarding pay will require information on the current pay scale in the industry. So if they're negotiating over pay, they want to know, what do workers in similar companies in the industry receive? And how does the company for which they're negotiating, or which they're involved, how does that compare with other companies? Look at the skill levels of the employees and the job roles, perhaps the responsibilities that they've taken on, and perhaps the training and retraining they've undertaken. Look at the trends in statistics in the country. Look at government statistics on perhaps the rate of inflation, or look at the amount of imports and the internationally related data that can be picked up, for example, on competition from overseas caused by globalization. Look at the rates of technical change and the retraining that the employees need to undergo on a frequent basis in order to be able to properly use the equipment and compete effectively. and look at the history of cooperation between employees and management within the organisation, and see what relationship existed over the previous years. Look at the business environment in general, in other words. Look at what other companies are doing, look what the government's recommending, look at government reports regarding the economy, look at the potential competition from abroad, technical change, restructuring, emphasis on quality. Look at the re-skilling that's required on the part of the workforce, and enter these into the pay negotiations, because pay is the recompense for the efforts that the employees are going to make. Also, of course, look at the current business financial position of the business. If the business is struggling, it can't afford big pay settlements. If the business is flourishing, perhaps it can afford more. So be realistic in making the claim. So those are just some of the points that relate to, for example, pay negotiations. But the negotiations may be over just about anything. Could be over hours of work, or holiday entitlement, or some sort of sickness leave, or health and safety issues. It can be over many issues. But whatever the issues are, it's important that they are looked at from various angles, and the negotiators are appropriately briefed to talk on these subjects. Now, set objectives. Well, objectives should be achievable and should be in line with what the negotiator is aiming to achieve. It's futile to set objectives that are not achievable, because what's the point? What's the point in negotiating for something that can't happen? So the objectives should be achievable. So they have to be realistic. There has to be common sense involved in the negotiations. Objectives are seen as benchmarks and outcomes that the negotiator feels it as acceptable. What does the negotiator think is acceptable? And these are the benchmarks. These are what it's attempting to achieve, and perhaps it's marked against similar companies in the industry. So look at what the negotiation is trying to achieve, what are its outcomes, how does the organisation match up against similar organisations, and also insert what is acceptable to the negotiator. But make sure that whatever's being negotiated is achievable. If it's not achievable, there is no point. There's no point in having the negotiations, because it cannot be achieved. Both parties should set objectives that are realistic in order to pursue any negotiation and settlement. It's important that there is goodwill, in other words, on both sides. They should go into the negotiations aiming to achieve an outcome, not going into the negotiations to spoil the atmosphere and to spoil the negotiations and to have no result. That's not the right attitude, because that will lead to further escalation in the problems and the issues, and could mean strike action or withdrawal of labour or some sort of damage to the organisation, which is harmful to both sides. If the company suffers, both the employees and the management suffer. So both parties should set objectives that are realistic and then attempt to achieve those objectives. For example, it's unrealistic for employees to demand, say, a pay increase from something like, let's say, £12 an hour to £100 an hour. That could be seen as totally unrealistic. That's eight and a half times what they're currently getting. So that's 850% increase in wages. And that may be seen as totally unrealistic. So setting some outlandish figure is just a waste of time. And it's likely to be the case that both sides, both the people asking for the increase in wages by that amount and the employers, know very well it's a waste of time. So it's wasting negotiating time. It's futile. Management and employee representatives will have to negotiate on achieving the best possible solution, one which will benefit both parties. That's the ideal solution, when both parties benefit. So there should be give and take, in other words. The management may concede higher wages and higher salaries, but in return perhaps get more flexibility in working, or perhaps enable them to restructure the business in some particular way. So the management has achieved something and the workers have achieved something, and that's seen as a good outcome. Both parties should set objectives as a safety net and aim to achieve the outcome. There should be fallback positions. If the union is negotiating for higher wages, what will they accept? What's the lower limit? What will they go back to the membership with? What will they accept? What will the management accept? What's the lower limit? So both parties must have something in mind. That's the minimum they will accept. Now, identify strategy and tactics. Well, both parties have their own strategies before they negotiate. Their tactics may be to make some claim and then try to support it with figures and facts and negotiate around it, but at the same time perhaps have a reserve position, a fallback position, that if they don't get something they're prepared to move down a notch, but perhaps bring something else in, introduce something else into the discussions which will perhaps support the new position. And in other words, they'll have a set of tactics. They'll have various points and various arguments they can make, backed up by facts and figures, ideally. It's important that a strategy is in place and the negotiators have anticipated all scenarios. It's important for them to anticipate what the other side's going to say and do. And that's why perhaps a practice run, or perhaps a role play. If the union is involved, perhaps the union members who are involved in negotiations should play out the role amongst themselves, and some of them play the role of management to try and thwart the arguments being put forward, to try to criticise and upset the arguments that are being put forward. So the negotiators should anticipate what the other side's going to say or do. They shouldn't be surprised at any stage in the negotiations. Whatever the other side say, they should have anticipated that. It should have been thought about beforehand, and they should have a position ready to cope with that. Strategies and tactics should address a range of scenarios and the possible offer the party will accept. So they should know that the other party to the negotiations will have a whole range of suggestions and counterpoints, and there will be different scenarios offered and different types of situation discussed, and they'll also have reserve positions below which they will not go, but they don't tell each other during the negotiations. That's what they keep to themselves. That's a part of their negotiating tactics. But they should be able to have a range of scenarios. They should have worked out in advance what the others are thinking or doing, or what if they say that, how will we respond? If they move in this direction, what will we do? So it should have been worked out in advance. So both parties, the management, let's say, and the trade union, both of them can negotiate effectively because they understand each other's tactics, they understand what they're putting forward, and they understand the whole scenario, they understand all that's involved in the negotiations. Identifying strategy and tactics. Well, in order to devise a strategy, it's important to consider possible responses from the opposing party. So when getting a strategy, it's important that, let's say, the trade union or the employees rehearse different strategies, different scenarios. They should rehearse their position and what the other side will put forward, and the different arguments are going to be made, and the facts and figures are going to be produced, and how are they going to counter this? How are they going to make their case? What facts and figures can they use? And then draw up a strategy. At what point will they introduce certain requirements? At what point will they concede a point, if need be? And if they do concede it, do they need something else, some compensation from the other side because they have conceded? Counter proposals and arguments should be prepared beforehand to achieve the best possible solution. It's important that both sides practice their arguments, practice making the case, have clarity about what they're looking for, and make it reasonable. Tactics must be considered. For example, the most important agenda should be discussed first to achieve the best solution. So when the agenda for the meeting is agreed between both parties, the important points should be made at the front, at the start. The lesser points, they can be dealt with later, but it's important to get the big issues out of the way. Get the big issues dealt with. A good strategy should offer the following outcomes. It should be an optimistic scenario. What would be the best or the ideal settlement? So a good strategy would look at what's the best that can be achieved, and try to get a strategy around achieving that, whatever the optimal scenario is, trying to get the negotiations configured in a way that enables them to achieve what they're setting out to achieve. So try to get them to get the other side to agree quickly, perhaps, to their proposals. It's an optimistic scenario. Try to win the argument quickly, get it across, get the points across, and almost overwhelm the other side. Overwhelm them with facts and figures, and make a very polished presentation. If there is progress, what would be the realistic settlement? What would both sides agree? At what point can they agree? When one side puts forward a proposal, the other side says they agree, and that's the end of the negotiation process. At what point? They must know what is it they will accept. And once that point is reached and it cannot be improved upon, that's the end of the negotiation process. That's when the settlement is agreed. If it's a very pessimistic situation where the two sides are very far apart, they're not agreeing, they're not making progress, perhaps they've met several times and they still haven't made progress, in that case each side will be looking for what's the fallback plan. What happens if the negotiations fail? What will we do then? If the negotiations fail, will it lead to strike action? Will it lead to a closure of the business? both sides have to start considering what is the fallback position. That in itself may focus their minds on getting a solution when they realize the negotiations are not going well and perhaps it could escalate. Or they may think that they can't go forward, perhaps they need new negotiators, or perhaps an outside agency to get involved to try and help bring about a solution, because they themselves can't do it. They recognize that they're not making progress, so perhaps bring in somebody from the outside, perhaps some professionals from the outside. Selection of participants, teams and work activities. Well, negotiation is a process which requires a group of individuals to carry out tasks. Negotiation cannot be conducted by one individual. Generally speaking, negotiations within companies are carried out by groups of people, by a team. They have made the case. So in the case of, let's say, the employees, they will have a negotiator, but they will have people supporting the negotiator, people finding data, doing the research. And I'll just look through the various types in a moment. But the point is, it's a team activity, and the team should work well together. There are numerous tasks involved in negotiating. A team should consist of individuals who have specialist knowledge and skills in conducting the tasks. It's important that the team be composed of the best personnel with the best skills, and they come together with their individual skills to make a very strong negotiating team. The tasks could include a spokesperson, somebody who speaks on behalf of the team, a researcher, a good note taker, someone who will keep good records and make sure everything is recorded, representatives, perhaps if it's a trade union representing the employees, some representatives from the employees should be there to make sure that what's been said and what's been portrayed is fair and accurate. There could be union members representing the membership within the company. There could be management expertise. It's a whole variety of different skills and talents required to make up each team, the management team and perhaps the employee team. And that makes the team more effective. There are different expertise that can be drawn upon. Presentation. Well, the presentation stage is the first face-to-face meeting of both parties. This is when they finally meet. The presentation. They've done all of the research. They've spoken to each other about the issues. They've dry run it. They've role played all the different scenarios. They've worked out their strategies and so on. Finally, they get to meet the other side. And this is when the cases are presented. During the presentation stage, both parties have the opportunity to bring their cases forward and discuss possible solutions. So try to imagine a situation where the management are in the room and let's say the employee representatives are in the same room. They each make their case, they state exactly what they want to see happen as a result of the negotiations. It could be, it's very unlikely, but it could be a solution is found immediately. Generally speaking, they will present the case and then the negotiations will follow on from there. This is the stage where the organisation will implement their strategies and tactics. The organisation, the management will bring all of their expertise to bear in the negotiations, will bring in their experts, the employees will bring in their experts and their team, and the scene is now set for the negotiations. Both parties present their case and discuss the rationale behind the disagreement. They'll discuss the reason why there is a disagreement. Information gathered during the preparation stage is considered in reviewing the situation and finding a solution. So during the presentation, they understand each other's position. They understand what they're saying, what the issues are, what they want to see. So each side understands the other position precisely as a consequence of the presentation. They propose their ideal situation and negotiate to find common ground. So they each set out with their ideal outcome, but they know the chances are they're going to have to negotiate a second best. They're going to have to negotiate something less than the ideal. They're not going to get exactly what they want. They have to compromise. It's important that both parties understand and respect each case. The cases should not be dismissed immediately. They shouldn't be laughed at or mocked. Each case is serious, so each party should understand the case of the other side. And they should start looking for ways to bridge the difference between the two sides. The presentation stage is a search for a solution, not to judge, abuse, or become confrontational. The presentation stage is setting out what each side want and getting the other side to understand their position. If there are any adverse comments or joking about the other position or laughing at them or abusing them in some way, the negotiations will fail. And it'll fail because one side did not take the other side's case seriously. It's important that they both take each other's case seriously and try to find common ground. They should have mutual understanding and be willing to work together to find a solution. They're there to find a solution. They're there to try and bridge the difference and find a workable solution. Now, proposing and exploring. Well, after the presentation stage, both parties must take time to re-evaluate the situation and work as a team to revise solutions. So after the presentation stage, they now understand where they stand, each of them. The management on the one side and perhaps organised labour on the other side both understand what they want and what they want to see. Now it's time to re-evaluate the situation to see if they can accommodate each other, if they can start to find common ground, areas in which they can negotiate. The proposing and exploring stage is the process of negotiating and working with the opposing party to find a solution. So it's working and trying to find a solution, trying to find common ground, working with the other side to find a solution that's acceptable to both sides. This stage requires good listening skills, as the negotiator must listen to what the opposing party is trying to achieve. There should be good understanding of each other's position. Not just good listening skills, it's actually deeper. They should understand, have a deeper understanding of what the other side want from the negotiations. Communication skills are vital in this stage. Each party must be able to understand each other and be able to effectively communicate their concerns. It's important that the cases are put clearly, logically. There should be no ambiguity. The language used should be clear. Interpersonal and persuasive skills are also key. Negotiation about debating and persuading the opposing party to cave in and accept your offer. So negotiation is trying to get the other side to agree. It's trying to debate with them to show that their arguments are not logical, they're flawed arguments. It's trying to persuade them that the case you put forward is the best case. It's trying to get them to agree. So it's a debating situation. It should be good communication skills, each side putting the cases logically and clearly and trying to persuade the other side to accept their case. In this stage, both parties aim to achieve their objectives and aim for the best possible offer. So each of them are trying to get the other side to agree. Once the agreement is done, the negotiation is over and they will work with the new settlement. Now, trading and agreeing. Well, trading and agreeing is the final stage in the negotiation process. In this stage, a decision is made to accept or reject the terms of the opposing party. So after making the initial presentation, after consideration of the different issues involved, after some negotiation, there is then this idea of trying to trade, trying to offer the other side something in return for some concessions, and trying to get an agreement. The concept of this stage is to give something in return for something. So one party wants, let's say the union wants excuse me, wants more wages. Then it's important that, let's say, the management can't do that. The management may concede something in terms of holiday entitlement. So both parties are getting something. They're trading. They're not getting higher wages, but they're getting more holidays. A trade has been done. Parties try to give what is cheap to them in return for something that is valuable for them. Obviously, each party wants to get the most out of the negotiations. So they are trying to offer something which is cheap in return for something which they value. But this is the process of negotiations. This is the process of trying to find a settlement. During this stage, it's important that negotiators say what they mean. Phrases such as "take it or leave it" can have a damaging effect if the opposing party do not accept. So this is a crucial stage of the negotiation. This is where it could fail. And it could fail because the negotiators get tired. They've made the case several times. They've looked at different angles. They've made different proposals. And finally they become frustrated with the whole process. And they may say, well, take it or leave it. In other words, if you don't accept our offer, we finish. Well, that's a non-solution. That could lead to strikes, lockouts, damage to the business, company closure, unemployment. It could lead to a lot of issues. So it's important to have patience. And it's important for the negotiators say what they mean and try to find an accommodation. Negotiations are only successful if objectives are realistic. I said this earlier on. But the negotiations can only be successful if there are realistic objectives. The example I gave earlier was a pay increase from, let's say, £12 an hour to £100 an hour. Well, it's unrealistic and it would be rejected. If the rate of inflation in the country is 5% and they're looking for 850%, that's not realistic. So both sides have to make realistic offers. That's the source I've been placing this whole talk on, Lee. It's worth looking him up online. Go across the notes again. It's quite a long class, and make some of your own notes from the video and do some reading in the background on negotiations. It's an important topic because, in a sense, it's negotiations of this type that keeps business running. It keeps the workers and employees moving in the same direction, and it enables the organisation to move across time and to flourish and to be successful. But that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.